Last week, we brought you an exclusive interview with a former civil servant who revealed that a counter-terrorism course being offered at King's College to the Blob in London is infected with anti-Western ideology, with those on the course being told not to use terms like terrorist as it implies moral judgment. Take a listen.
But I think it's deeply shameful, given the atrocities on the 7th of October, that there are bunches of civil servants who are in counter-terrorism and they can't call counter-terrorism for what it is when they see it, and are instead focusing and putting weight on issues that are really not of vital importance when there are issues of vital importance. We're seeing massive problems with extremism on our streets in the UK at the moment. It's deeply unsettling and it's very scary to be Jewish at the moment in the UK.
Joining me now to discuss this from Tel Aviv is the author and associate editor of The Spectator, Douglas Murray. Douglas, good to see you. Welcome to the Independent Republic.
Good to see you.
This story has kind of taken on a bit of a life of its own, hasn't it, since you highlighted it a week or so ago. Tom Tugendhat, the Securities Minister's now got involved, and it looks as though our friend at King's College, the man that you've pointed out is a bit of a Remainery leftist and should really be probably sanctioned in some way, is going to get his collar felt in some sense.
Oh, well, I've sent legal letters both to the man in question, a man called Peter Newman, an academic at King's College London, and also lawyers' letters to King's College London. There's several things I want to know. By the way, the first thing I want is that I think that Professor Newman should obviously be suspended by the university pending further inquiries. And there's two reasons for that, I think. The first is that on this course, which was paid for by you and me and everyone watching, the taxpayers of Britain, we paid our taxpayer money to these people at King's College London to indoctrinate civil servants from the Home Office, the Foreign Office, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Defence in counter-terrorism studies. And what did they get? But this highly ideological person, Peter Newman, who has passed form in insulting members of the British government and lying about them, for instance, he indoctrinates civil servants. He tells them all this stuff about one man's terrorism is another man's freedom fighter. Seems to be something that Peter Newman or someone else on the course said, which is a completely banal as well as untrue comment, because of course the law of the land, the law of Britain, says very clearly who is a terrorist. Actually, it's really not that tricky. And then he went on to say that the government's own counter-terrorism prevent reviewer, Sir William Shawcross, one of the great experts in the UK, called in by the government to give advice on counter-terrorism and the counter-terrorism policy. This man Newman, this lecturer at King's College London, smeared and defamed Sir William Shawcross and totally misrepresented his findings and basically said, well, I've got my own findings, so you can work off them. And then another mistake he made, which is rather more personal for me, is that he started talking not about Islamist terrorism, which all of the government advice says is the biggest threat to our security in Britain, which it is. He started talking about so-called far-right ideology. And when asked to give examples of people who are far-right, he chose me and my friend Joe Rogan, the podcaster, who is a libertarian. He was asked what should be done about Joe Rogan and me. And this man, Professor Peter Newman, said that he credited that we do, Joe and I, have quite large platforms, particularly online. And he said it could be difficult to suppress us online, but he said, society will have to find other ways to suppress them. Now, I want King's College London to explain to me what their professor means when he says that he wants me suppressed by other means. What are those means? Who is meant to carry them out? Are they physical? What are they? There's a lot of explaining to be done.
There really is. And one of the things that staggered me when I was talking to Anna Stanley last week was that she was about the only person in the room who thought that saying calling people terrorists was a moral judgment and possibly not one that should be made. She was about the only person in the room who thought that that was a bit strange. And she was the only person in the room that thought it was a bad idea to call Hamas terrorists.
Right. See, Mike, this is the problem we have that I'm very glad that is now coming out into the open. We've seen it in other bits of the public sector. There's an example of the fact that, the Conservatives can be in government and not in power. They can have their own policies, and the civil service doesn't have to pursue them. You see these civil servants that it was exposed in the piece, are sort of rather glib about Islamist terrorism, worry about whether it's Islamophobic to talk about Islamic terrorism. I mean, this is so kindergarten level. I mean, the fact that this was being discussed at a supposedly good institution like King's College London, a supposed institution of higher learning, is just amazing to me. And also we see here, Mike, the example of what happens, and I don't need to tell you this, when government just metastasizes. The Blair government set up the counter-terrorism policies that we currently have after the 7th of July 2005 suicide bombings. It has since morphed into this whole industry that people like Peter Newman suck on the teat of. This whole industry of what is terrorism and what is extremism and how do we counter it and what is it about civil society? Why do they do it? Because they don't want to be focused on what is the primary threat to the security of citizens in the UK, which is Islamist terrorism.
Yes.
And, it is extraordinary as I've watched these programs of the British government morph and become these other things. And then the expose that we have just had shows that these civil servants are not focused on the primary threat that William Shawcross's review and government ministers and the security services say is the preeminent threat. Instead, they sit around in a lecture theatre paid for by you and me and everyone watching, and they defame people like me, and I don't mind. I can look after myself. Joe Rogan can certainly look after himself. He's actually a cage fighter. But I'm most worried about two things. One is the fact that this lecturer could smear and lie about the government's own independent reviewer into counter-terrorism legislation in the UK, William Shawcross. And the second is a bigger question for King's London. King's College London has in recent years been in receipt of tens of millions of pounds from the government of Qatar.
Yes.
Now, the Qatari government, apart from running a sort of slave-owning state, a sort of serfdom state, is also the primary supporter, apart from Iran, of the terrorists of Hamas. The terrorist leadership of Hamas literally lives in Qatar. What is the responsibility of King's College London when it takes tens of millions of pounds from the terrorist supporting government of Qatar and the terrorist hosting government of Qatar? And have the Qataris got some say, perhaps, in what is taught at King's College London? Is the fact that the Qatari Hamas supporting government of Qatar also supporting King's College London something that gives a certain weight to the words of people like Peter Newman? Can they be bought? Have they been bought? King's College London and other institutions are institutions that the Qatari government wants to buy up. It wants to buy up influence. I want not only the inquiry that Tom Tugendhat, the security minister, has now instigated, I would like a further inquiry launched by the British government to find out the extent to which King's College London has been corrupted by the terrorist-supporting government of Qatar. I think that King's College London should make sure they don't start destroying files or emails fast. I think there should be a full inquiry into the extent to which King's College London has been in receipt of the money from the terrorist supporters of Qatar. And I think that an awful lot is going to be found. If they want to save their own skins, they should come clean about the extent to which they have been corrupted. And I think they will have to suspend this man, Peter Newman, who is not by any means somebody that any British university or any university should have on their payroll.
No, well, it could be a very good beginning to something, and let's hope that they do investigate him, and they do investigate, as you say, where all those funds come from. Also this week, James cleverly announcing that he is to add Hizb ut-Tahrir to the list of proscribed terrorist groups. So maybe after a while, after all this marching that's been going on, now supporting Yemen, in addition to supporting Palestine and Hamas, these people marching around in London will finally have the government do something about it.
Well, I mean, I'd hope so. Hizb ut-Tahrir is a group, an extremist group that's banned in many Muslim countries, who actually are much wiser than we are in the UK about this problem. And Hizb ut-Tahrir, Tony Blair said he'd ban them after 7/7 in 2005, and he didn't. David Cameron said he'd ban them, and he didn't. It has to be said that Hizb ut-Tahrir has done a rather spectacular audition for the most crazed bearded maniacs of the week competition, week in, week out in London. Hizb ut-Tahrir's maniacs have been on the streets of London at these anti-Israel protests week after week, and have called for things like Muslim armies to arise. So finally, the Metropolitan Police and the government have recognised that actually, like, supporting terrorists on the streets of London isn't a great look. But there's one thing that has to be said about this, if I may say so, Mike, which is this. Banning Hizb ut-Tahrir is one thing. Prosecuting its leadership is another. Remember, its leadership includes, as our colleague Piers Morgan has shown, a nice NHS GP. Yeah. We'll see if people like him are arrested in the coming days. But the most important thing is the Metropolitan Police and the British government keep on doing this late catch-up. It's been consistent in their policy for 20 years now. Maniacs scream hate, jihad, all sorts of craziness on the streets of our capital. And those images go around the world. And sometimes the Met and others, they move in later and they occasionally make an arrest. And here we've seen an actual final banning of another Islamist group. But the really interesting thing to me is this. They don't seem to realize the PR disaster that is the Metropolitan Police's policy on this. They think if they move in later and ban a group and make occasional arrests for hate speech and things, that does it. Mike, as you know, these images of bearded jihadist maniacs calling for Muslim armies to arise and calling for jihad on the streets of Britain have gone around the world.
Yes.
They absolutely despoil our country's reputation. Our country needs to get its good reputation back. I hope this is a start, but it's by no means the end.
Good to talk. Douglas, thank you very much indeed. Douglas Murray there, reporting in live from Tel Aviv.